My whole childhood, I essentially believed that I was an alien, that I was extremely sensitive, like pathologically sensitive, extremely dramatic, like too sensitive for this world, and that my environment was normal and healthy, and that I was the problem for really struggling to cope with it. Which I now realize is not true at all, but that response or variations of that response, variations of somehow making yourself the problem, is a common way that kids cope with traumatic childhoods because they can't really see their parents as the problem. And a big part of therapy for me the last few years has been looking at different things that I went through and looking at ways that the child version of me blamed myself and felt guilty and ashamed or expected unrealistic things of myself for my age and power level at the time. Like I expected myself to just be like perfect at coping with things that would be really hard for an adult to cope with. And I see that now and I'm able to empathize with myself more than ever before. I still have a long way to go. But it's when I see things online of people talking about how therapy is about making yourself the victim and how like my generation is doing therapy to like shit on their parents. It's so frustrating to me because there is some amount of recognizing that I wasn't responsible and that the adults around me were responsible. That is a piece of healing. But first of all, that's a reasonable thing to do when something happened when you were a child. It's not reasonable to expect somebody to hold responsibility for what they went through when they were 8 years old. So, if that's what we're talking about, looking back at being 8 years old and going, wait, that wasn't my fault. That was somebody else's responsibility. It's a weird thing to shame people for doing that because that's a very reasonable way to look at a situation that involves a child, is to say the child doesn't have any blame here. But more importantly, the second part of this is I have been so much more empowered through all of this. Prior to starting therapy, I was very passive, very much a people pleaser, very much tried to keep the peace. I continued to feel responsible for everybody else's emotions, for not upsetting anybody, not disagreeing with anybody. And in that, I basically had no backbone. I had no voice. And that wasn't healthy for my adult life because being overly accommodating only makes sense when you don't have the power to change things or to leave the situation or whatever, which wasn't my situation as a child. But in adulthood, I have a good life. I have a good husband. In any and all of my healthy relationships, it doesn't do me or them any good if I am just appeasing everybody all of the time and feeling overly responsible for their emotions and am not being my authentic self, am not expressing my emotions and my values and my beliefs. So my perspective now is that I kind of was in a victim mindset until getting a certain depth in therapy because I didn't realize that I had the power to do things differently, to be more authentic to myself, to set boundaries, to meet my own needs, to say no when people asked things of me that were more than I could handle. And I'm not saying that I do these things perfectly now by any means. Like, it's very much something I'm still learning, and it's very hard when you have a lifetime of just people pleasing everybody. But in the instances I've had to use my voice, to set boundaries, to be more authentically myself, that is so the opposite of playing the victim. That is really recognizing my power and stopping seeing myself as helpless and hopeless and a victim. it's just so maddening to me that some people try to paint therapy as this thing that adult kids are doing to stay in a victim mindset. Because when you have childhood trauma, you you aren't allowed to be powerful as a child. You don't often have agency and autonomy and a voice. You have to cater to those around you. And that doesn't just magically stop when you turn 18 and no longer need your parents in like the most practical sense to like take care of you and stuff. So what a lot of us are doing is, yes, recognizing that we weren't responsible for what happened to us as children, but also trying to find ways to empower ourselves and to not be victims anymore, to to really act and be proactive in our own lives instead of continuing to kind of default to just reacting to our lives the way that we were conditioned to as kids.